Kia ora koutou katoa, ko mortendierde tēnei. I'm pleased to also be presenting this paper on behalf of my co-author, Dr. Becky Kittle. The paper presents the design of our research to investigate people's housing preferences. The research has been pretty successful to date, which I hope to explain further during the following 9.5 minutes. It has been so successful that we're now characterizing it as a pilot study in the hope that we can attract funding to take it further. Local and central governments have for some time been tinkering with regulatory tools to make it easier to deliver the housing we need in this country. Depending on the sources we consult, we understand that our largest cities will experience considerable growth over the next couple of decades. For example, Wellington is expected to see a population increase of between 50 and 80,000 people in the next 30 years. Suffice to say, if we can make things happen with the urgency the situation demands, there will be a lot of houses built in concentrated areas over the coming period. This also raises questions around whether we're building the right houses to meet the needs and expectations of the people who will live here. In particular, because of the extensive literature study we undertook, we know that there have been very few studies on Maori housing preferences. A large part of the problem, of course, is that we rely so heavily on private enterprise to supply the housing we so desperately need. It is often stated that the market will deliver what people want and need. Clearly that isn't the case. How housing is produced is dependent on a whole range of complex, interwoven issues that many outside the development industry have little insight to. What we do know is that the industry keeps producing what it has always produced, and that there is little incentive for most to do anything different. Some 65 previous New Zealand studies were consulted in our literature review. What we discovered was that 60% of these adopted quantitative methods, either fully or in part. These lent themselves to being analyzed with statistical tools, but we felt that they were constrained by the nature of the questions that were put to respondents. There seemed in many of these to be little space for nuanced experiences or expressions of preference. The remaining 40% were based on qualitative methods, either by interviewing respondents or by holding focus group discussions. Opportunities for unexpected responses attracted us to develop qualitative methods in our own study. These studies were also able to be classified under 3 headings: those that address choices that people make, those that investigate experience of living, and those that look at what people would prefer to live in. The choices people make are clearly constrained by what they have to choose between at the time, and we felt that this would not help us understand preferences that might go beyond what the market currently supplies. Preferences, on the other hand, can be aspirational and look further into the future. We designed the study to capture qualitative data. The literature also helped us to target 8 housing and neighborhood attributes. These are the location relative to the CBD, location relative to neighborhood amenities, the dwelling typology, how large it is, how it sits on the section relative to the street, the dimensions of any outdoor space that may be privately available to residents, how sunny the place is, and finally the way in which a car might be accommodated on site, if at all. We were looking to understand the most important attributes of housing, and we thought we could arrive there by looking at what people were willing to trade off. More about that shortly. We specifically targeted participants according to 4 demographic dimensions. These were gender, Māori or non-Māori, ownership versus renting, and then whether or not a person had experience living in medium-density housing. While we were focused on people's housing preferences, we also thought it would be opportune to speak to our respondents about their current choice of housing and the reasons for these, and about their previous housing experiences. These conversations, which were designed to be shorter in duration, also served as an icebreaker between the interviewer and the interviewee. The main event, however, was a discussion around preferences, and this was prompted by a 2-stage exercise. we designed a little tool to foster discussion about their most important housing attributes. In the first exercise, people selected between one of 3 or 4 options in each of the 8 housing attribute areas. For example, they could choose whether they lived in an inner city area within walking distance to the CBD, in a suburban area served by public transport, or in a peripheral area requiring a commute. These selections were then discussed with the interviewer. A second set of identical cards was then given to the participant. Each of these cards had a point value ascribed to a particular option in the attribute area. People were advised that they had only a set number of points to spend, and that total was set at something less than the total of their unconstrained choices. Again, their selections and the trade-offs they were willing to make were discussed. The trade-offs provide us with an indication of what is most important and what is expendable among the options for each attribute. With only 15 respondents, however, there's hardly enough data here to confidently declare findings about people's housing preferences. The really rich material is in people's responses. The interviews have been transcribed and coded. We've begun the process of interpreting these to tell the story about housing preferences of these 15 people. I might add that while we had targeted 16 people, we fell short of filling one of the demographic categories. Of course, while we were able to collect about an hour's worth of material from each participant, this is hardly enough to confidently describe a set of findings. Accordingly, we've now classified this as a scoping study and will be utilizing the same methods to collect additional responses, including, we hope, from people outside the Wellington region. Nevertheless, we've begun to understand a little more about the housing preferences of Māori. One issue that comes through in the interviews is the importance of Māori to be able to offer manaaki to extended family and to members of their own iwi. This issue became even more important for those who, because of their current circumstances, are unable to provide manaaki as they would like. In other respects, we believe we have effectively tested the methodology and found it to have generated a very useful set of data. We look forward to using it further. Tēnā koutou. I'd also like to quickly acknowledge the University Research Fund of Victoria University and the assistance provided by Jonathan Osterman, Nina Boyd, Pascal Dickinson, Ilana McNeil, and Jane Kent. Again, thank you very much.